Okay, we'll get started. My name is Glenn Corbett. I'm the president of the Paterson Museum Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that assists the Paterson Museum in its various endeavors. And one of those efforts is this particular webinar series, which is the stories behind the story, conversations and chats with Passaic County historian Ed Smyk. And today we have a special treat for everyone because Ed has got his compadre there sitting right next to him, is also a Paterson Museum Foundation trustee, but he's more famous and known to everyone as Lawrence Pat Kramer, mayor of Paterson, former mayor of Paterson, New Jersey. And we're so happy to have him today. And we're going to talk about, Ed's going to talk about his long history here in Paterson, including particularly the issues of historic preservation, the birth of this museum in this building, the Rogers building, where I'm broadcasting from today. And so we're really, really excited to have Mayor Kramer on here with us today to talk about his life. And Ed is going to take us through a series of photos that will help us understand what's happened in the years that the mayor has lived here and grew up here in Paterson. So Ed, I'm turning it over to you, and on with the show. Thank you.
Glenn, thank you. It's my pleasure to be with my friend Pat Kramer. We've known each other for a long time. And this program is a reminiscence about things historical that he brought into being as the mayor of Paterson. He was first elected in 1966, re-elected in 1969. He resigned to become commissioner of the Department of Community Affairs under Governor William T. Cahill, and elected to a third term in 1974. At his first inaugural, which I was among the crowd on that bright, cold day, yes, on January 2nd, Mr. Mayor, 1967, you gave a stirring inaugural address. And I just wanted to quote four of the things that you said that are so a hallmark of what you accomplished for the city. And you said, quote, "Our city was founded by Alexander Hamilton's desire for innovation in American industry. The administration is dedicated to innovation and ideas. This administration does not fear change. We pledge to you, starting this very minute, a new philosophy of government dedicated solely and completely to the task of making our city of Paterson a proud and pleasant place to live and work." And those are the ideals that you expressed. And in back of me is this wonderful mural of the historic buildings and historic sites that were saved and initiated under your administration. So, you know, there's a story that there's an old adage, I guess, that people's accomplishments can live on and spur other accomplishments and get other people involved. And that's exactly what you did. Now, I want to go to our next photo, Glenn.
Hold on one sec.
Okay. There you go, Pat.
Oh my God.
At your house.
Yeah, and the kids, Rose, the idea that Marielle standing there with all those kids says it all.
And that was taken in your house in Paterson. And that is from the second inaugural ball booklet that was put out.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And everybody would really like to know, how did you get the name Pat?
Pat, yeah.
Tell us about that.
There's a couple of different stories. I'm not sure any of them are accurate, but the tale that I got teased about always was I happen to have had four older sisters. And when it came time, I'm really Lawrence after my dad. But they kidded me always about the fact that they were so busy naming girls that the name Pat just popped up. How and why really it was stuck, I don't know. But it, as a result, was always, I never knew any name but Pat, except if there was official business of some kind going on, then quickly I had to be Lawrence, and Lawrence at City Hall, that everybody knew was Pat, but I can't give you any exciting tale as to where the name comes from.
Well, that's an interesting story. I think we now have it down on record how that name developed, because people have often asked me, and I said, honestly, didn't know. So I thought I would throw that in.
Right,
Now, here in the photo is Mary Ellen Forbes Kramer,
correct.
who was the first lady of Paterson for 14 years, and Flavia Laya, whom you know very well,
Sure.
the first chairwoman of the Paterson Historic Preservation Commission. She called her the heart and soul of the movement to recover Paterson's heritage. And Mary Ellen Park atop the Passaic Falls is dedicated in her memory on August 28, 2015. She was a woman too, like yourself, of boundless energy, and always put the city forth and basically advertised its history to thousands of people. So can you tell us a few things about Mary Ellen?
Well, I think you put your finger right on it. The boundless energy was hers. She had a desire for the story of Paterson's history to be told properly, that it was so unique. Its contribution, obviously, to industry, which gave America the strength to be able to stand on her own 2 feet. The question of the stories of Hamilton and Washington, Hamilton recognizing that if the young little nation did not have an industrial capability, evidence of those who would want to take us could happen. And it was vital that we had that energy and manufacturing capability for America, which, whatever else, was born at this site. And Mary Ellen knew that, understood it clearly, and wanted very much for everybody to be aware of the incredible contribution that Paterson had made to the United States.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, but I think there's a very important point to stress about Hamilton and what he did in Paterson, because what he believed in, what resonated at that time, was the government was going to help industry. I mean, here was the Secretary of the Treasury, who was promoting a private corporation,
Right.
promoting industry, promoting the profit motive, so that people could harness their abilities and grow something here. And it was done on a private, this is the link between government and private industry, where government would foster that. And I know in my conversations with Mary Ellen Kramer, she ardently believed in that, involving people to get involved in the city, to people to develop themselves and achieve careers in a city like this.
That couldn't be said more effectively or more accurately than was the case said. I appreciate it. And you're so right about Mary Ellen's contribution.
Well, you know, you come from an entrepreneurial family, a business-oriented family. Can we go to the next photo, Glenn, please? There's your dad, Lawrence F. Kramer Sr.,
Amen.
taken probably in the late 20s.
Yeah.
Born in New York, came to Paterson as a youngster, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Philip Kramer, your grandparents.
Correct.
He studied engineering at Ohio Northern University.
Correct.
Served in World War I as a commissioned officer, built miles of highways in New York and New Jersey. And after his discharge, he headed his own building material firm, the Lawrence F. Kramer Company. And for some 40 years, he was involved. And he worked with John W. Ferguson, a very noted builder. And I wonder if you have any memories of Ferguson himself.
I do not as himself, other than the fact that they might be all going to a dinner. Where are you going tonight? The Kramers and the Fergusons were going out to dine. They were good friends, separate from the business commitment.
So he supplied building materials to John W. Ferguson, whose firm constructed some of the most noteworthy buildings in Paterson.
No question.
Meyer Brothers, numerous buildings in
Alexander
Paterson.
Hamilton Hotel was his.
Yes.
Fabian Theater was his.
And then he was tapped by the city government, and he served for 7 years as commissioner of the Paterson Board of Public Works, active in many civic organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, the Red Cross, the Lions Club.
You're amazing. You
cetera.
have it all.
And I know you worked for the company for a long
I
time.
certainly did. I came home from college. I was in the second year of college when my father died. So I left school and went to the business with a commitment to my mother that I have to stay at it till I got my degree. So we did that kind of at nights. But meanwhile, we were in the building material business for many, many years until the property just became frankly too valuable. And St. Joseph's Hospital insisted on being able to spread out. And that kind of
bought the property.
right, exactly. That brought about the end of the business operation that we were in, that we then transferred to the outfit that I'm now with.
You know, a lot of people don't know, and I only knew that your father was handicapped by terrible arthritis.
That's right.
And there's a photo which I've seen, which I cannot locate at present, of him walking with double crutches.
That's right.
And he would actually drag himself to work. And tell us a little about his indomitable spirit.
Well, that was it. And I tell you, very interesting. He could not go out onto a ball field and play baseball with you or football as much as he loved those sports. But the best kept secret is many times cripples are always good swimmers because they have tremendous upper body strength.
Yes.
And as a result, we always had boats. My dad loved boating, he loved fishing, and of course it was a sport he could do because he could swim, as well as take some of these super trips we took with our Chris-Craft at the time. But he never allowed the disease to put him out of business. He fought it always. Believed there were somebody with a cure out there someplace. It was always game to try anything. Now, I can't report that a lot of it worked and changed his physical condition, but it did, in fact, give him a constant belief that somewhere I'm going to get some relief, and he tried many different cures. But as arthritic patients can tell you, today there's more modern approaches than were at that time.
They were limited in those days.
Very limited, but he never allowed that to put him out of business. He ran the business and added to our lives. I have 4 sisters at the time, and life was fine, it's special. I'm the last one to ever have a complaint of what it was like growing up in Paterson.
Could we go to number 3, Jack, of the mayor's mother? And there is Ann Walker Kramer.
You're amazing. That's right.
Born in 1902 and passed in 1967. She was born in Newport, New York.
Correct.
The daughter of John and Mary Flaherty Walker.
Right.
Came to Paterson to teach in the public school system. And she was active in civic affairs and vice president of the family building business until her retirement.
Right.
So that was taken in the Quackenbush photo studio, incidentally.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. But
And,
that was my mother, and she was always very active with the PTAs and whatever my sisters and I were involved in. She was always very, very active.
So your parents gave you a very firm grounding in civic life.
Amen.
And that led to you to enter civic life yourself. And could you tell us, your first forays?
Yeah,
Civic.
I had was active in town and some of the organizations, the charities, that kind of thing. And then I was asked to serve on the Board of Education, which I did and enjoyed. And from there to the Planning Board. And then there was a group that was getting very unhappy with the sense of direction we seemed to be going in. And I always refer to Charlie Jacobs as the Jacobs Department Store as the most convincing friend who said, you know something, instead of complaining about the way things are being done in town,
Do something about it.
We
Let's
got to do
about
something
it.
about it, exactly. And to come by the Republican nomination for mayor was certainly very easy. Nobody seemed to want that assignment. But Charlie Jacobs, who was really the backbone of our campaigns, he was convinced that the title of that wasn't going to be the issue. It was, can we present a story that is clear enough to make positive differences in Paterson that we could implement, that we could make happen? Can we really make a difference? We can't until we get there.
And Charlie Jacobs was by training a journalist.
Absolutely. Leave it to you to know that. Few people did.
He went to Columbia,
Yeah.
and later when his store was sold, he became the managing editor. I believe was managing editor for the North Jersey newspapers.
You're amazing how you know those things. Yep.
And he would relax from the business before this by writing novels. And he was a very skilled guy. But that was another hallmark of your administration, is that you, in filling the administrative positions, the managerial positions, you tried to bring into Paterson people who had the requisite talents. And if someone in the city didn't have those, you went out of the city.
Amen.
And again, you know, one of the people that called to mind is our good friend Sid Willis, who
Yep.
became your head of community affairs.
Yep.
And
Yep. Further down the road. We start with John O'Malley and Frank Blesso, who's still active today in Paterson, by the way, as a volunteer in many ways. Marty Sukanik, who cared greatly about the direction Paterson was going in, a successful banker. He'd heard about John O'Malley and his team and said, see if you can't get them. And we went after them and successfully were able to bring them to Paterson. Quality people who knew exactly what they were doing and how to get things done. And it made a great difference for a foundation for other changes we wanted to make. We were able to make the argument that, look, these folks came from out of town and you all agree that they know what they're doing and they're being very effective. So we could do more of it. That's where we're able to capture things like Sid Willis and Bill Pasquarel.
he was the policy planning
That's-
chief years later, but
That's right. And George Tuttle was
he was the finance director.
finance
He was
guy.
a whiz at it.
Exactly. He was a whiz, a very, very talented guy. And, you know, those people sort of had confidence in each other that, well, I'll come if you get him. If you've got them, I'm interested. And then you can develop a quality team. That's really kind of what happened in those years, where these different individuals had respect for each other and loved the assignment that was in front of them.
Yes, and they saw the potential too. And Larry Worth, I think of
Larry Worth
another-
was amazing as the business administrator. We stole him from, I've forgotten the town, but it was out west somewhere. A guy had told me about Larry Worth to see if he can get him, and get him we did. And again, Larry was incredibly effective. He and George Tuttle were the team that handled all the finances to keep us in the right direction.
Yes, yes. You know, I just wanted to make another comment on Sid Willis. This is a letter sent on, Department of Community Development, a copy of the letter in June of 1978 from Sid Willis.
Right.
And Sid talks, they were aware of the invaluable historic resources at the Passaic County Historical Society. And your collections have been tremendously useful in our research, and notably in the preparation of the current exhibit at the Rogers Building. And there was a special exhibit that was put up here under community development's auspices. And he talks about the $11 million grant from the federal government to help us to restore the Great Falls Historic District, which is what
we
you
see behind us.
started, which is what you started, your administration started, and enabled us to greatly expand our staff of professional archaeologists and historians. So here's Sid Willis is reaching out to the Historical Society wanting to involve them in providing these historic resources. Again, in the Historical Society, a private organization established in 1926 by what I call keepers of the true light, the true believers, rather.
Perfect.
People like Dr. D. Stanton Hammond,
Amen.
a private organization of people who did this because that fire burned in them to do it.
Yes.
And here we find Sid, recognizing that and
Yep.
tapping into it. So, I just thought that was
Sid was so effective in how he had the ability to convince people of an issue by demonstrating that it made sense as well as an important contribution to Paterson's future. That was Sid, active in long-term efforts and accomplishing so much in that direction.
Well, I think you'd gotten to know Sid from your work in community development down in Trenton.
Correct.
Yeah, and you persuaded him to take on the job here,
Yes.
which really says a lot. Along those lines, the mayor who would do anything to publicize
Right.
Paterson. Let's go to the next picture, Glenn. And there, in the bottom portion of the picture, is Mayor Kramer in a boat standing in the chasm of the Great Falls on October 30th, 1975.
Wow. And being scolded later for standing up in a boat, I'll have you know.
Really?
Yes.
Along with firefighter Vincent Mandara and Gerald Sloginski.
Yeah, good people.
And they were braving the whirlpools and rapids to dramatize LFK, Lawrence F. Kramer's opposition to the two bridges plan that would have diverted water to serve the Meadowlands and Bergen County communities. And that was a big to-do. There was a big demonstration of the fall. Flavia Laya was there.
Yeah. And effective.
And effective. I was there.
And effective.
And so would you want to just give us a little bit of the background on that? You remember Dean Null, who was
Sure.
head of North Jersey District Water Supply Commission. And there was this tremendous fear that the falls would be reduced to a trickle.
Yes.
And they countered by saying that wasn't the case, but you didn't believe it. And you did not want to see that water
Disappear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there you are on the rowboat that was taken by the Paterson News by somebody we knew and you knew very well, Lou Tunnell.
Yeah, oh, God bless Lou. Yep.
Yeah.
That is so true, though. The effort at that time, frightening was the right word, because they seemed to have very little interest in the significance of what the falls really meant and its purpose meant to Paterson's industrial opportunities. And we had to go out and make sure that got cut off at the pass, that nobody was going to steal the water that made the falls.
Well, I think people knew about the falls as the natural grandeur of it. And they knew something about the historic significance of it, and the steam generating station and the hydroelectric plant and the technology. And it attracted people of great caliber. As someone who just recently passed away, a man who I had great admiration for, and you did, is Russell Freeze.
Oh, that's for sure.
From the University of Maine, and he became the first, worked with Great Falls the Great Falls Historic Preservation Corporation to develop knowledge of the technology of the falls and the raceway system.
You've put it so well, exactly right, to develop the knowledge of what it really was, what it meant, and what it would mean to the future.
And in our prior program, when he unfortunately couldn't make it, but we had Frank Blesso, who he's another person who used his talents and abilities
and still does,
and is still doing it. And I just got a wonderful study that he so kindly shared with me and others that I was unaware of, that had been developed, that had been researched and written by Russell Fries a number of years ago. And Russell Fries never forgot this city.
Right.
Even though he moved away, he was still
But
vitally
he
interested
cared.
in technology.
Yep.
That's October 30th, 1975.
You know, Ed, I don't mean to embarrass you with adjectives, but I have to tell you that all along those years, your fights at different times, at different locations was absolutely vital to the accomplishments that you're talking about today.
Well, thank you,
And
Mayor. I appreciate
I'm
that.
serious.
I really
I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I want you to know Paterson is very, very grateful. You carried that torch when others didn't believe in it, and you made it happen again and again for Paterson.
Well, I keep trying to do that for our whole county. It's sometimes it's an uphill battle,
I'm sure.
and you have to pick your fight, so to speak.
Yes, yes.
But you know, I just had an email from somebody in Montclair, and there's a historic house, very important in the Upper Montclair
history of the
area.
family?
Well, it's in the history of Black history
Uh-huh.
of a man who became a freed slave. And they are trying to save this house
Uh-huh.
for museum purposes. And I had written that all of these movements to save these buildings are not per se undertaken by government. They're undertaken by private citizens who care.
A group who cares.
And there's a group associated with the Unitarian Church in Montclair that are doing this, that are banding together local historians to save this building. And that's what's happened here. With many degrees of success. Some have not been successful.
That's right.
But you know, you just can't give up the fight. And something that also hallmarks your administration is in our next photograph. And there is Mayor Kramer sitting under an umbrella with President of the United States, Gerald R. Ford.
Yes, yeah.
Dedicating the Passaic Falls as a National Historic Landmark on June 6, 1976. Now, could you tell us a little bit of that day? I mean, you had a reception for the president in your house.
We did. We took him home. I think what was so wonderful is that what we wanted to accomplish that day got accomplished. But make not light of the fact that the president himself understood what this was really all about, and how important it was that he came to Paterson, made the designations he made, because it put Paterson in a whole different light, both at the Washington level and clearly the Trenton level. The response to his visit enabled many of the things we had been attempting and not doing very well with, all of a sudden worked.
Well, you told me he opened doors.
He certainly did.
Yeah.
He certainly did. And in fairness, the response by the senators who attended, the congressmen who were
Yes,
there.
excuse me, but to everybody's left here, there's Peking is Bob Rowe, who was a big proponent.
Yeah.
And this transcended Republican and Democrat. These were people that were care. It didn't party affiliations, and it just didn't.
Ed, I am so happy you brought that up, and I should have. The miracle of many of those things that we were able to get done was because we had people in both parties who were not interested in that as the criteria for a decision. They were interested in the significant history that was here and what it would mean to the future and why it should exist with this kind of a response.
And you're speaking about the essence of compromise. You can have two different philosophies of government, but then you come together and achieve something for the people, which we've seen today really falter in our life today.
Yeah.
But there we have two Democrats, Bob Rowe, Senator Harrison Williams.
That's right.
The late in back of Senator Williams, that's Harry B. Haynes II.
Yeah.
Ed Haynes' son, the president. And next to our immediate right is Governor Brendan Byrne.
Yeah.
So he came to your house, I believe.
He did. We
And
went,
you had a
when we left the
reception there.
4th, went back to the house for a reception for everybody. And the important thing was, you said it a minute ago, there was no party affiliation energy being generated by this party or that party, political party. It was, hey, this is important, should be done, recognition of both sides of the aisle, if you will. And when the President of the United States came, he could make that happen that we needed desperately. By the way, the PS is, it changed everything in Washington for us. Once the president had been there, we could go to other offices and get action because they knew we had had a presidential visit and the president himself had designated to such significance the falls and its surrounding area.
I believe that you wrote a letter to the president inviting him here.
Yes.
And I think Norma and we'll talk about Norma Harrison in a minute, who was
Absolutely.
the public information officer.
Yep,
And she would bring into the historical aspects of it.
absolutely. She always did. She understood it, cared about it, wanted it done, and worked hard for it.
Well, what we have today are people that are, this incredible pettiness that you have and egotism, which it just interferes and cripples efforts to bring things about in a positive way.
Yeah, if I might, my own editorial, the old form of government, frankly, was, in my opinion, a lot more effective because you could make appointments of people whose interest was what we're trying to accomplish, not necessarily some political agenda that somebody had.
Or a reward for something.
Or a
Yeah,
reward.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, that's it. But that, this day had a dramatic positive effect on things we could then go get done in Trenton and in Washington.
And again, this day was inseparably linked to historic preservation.
That's
And
right.
the furtherance of historical preservation and helping to engender knowledge of history.
It's such a treasure right here, and it's ours. And it lends itself to so many positive things for a Paterson and Paterson area.
And I remember that day because I was sitting in the front with an umbrella,
Right.
and it was sort of one of those humid, raw days.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that falls was packed with people
Yeah.
who wanted to be there at that historic moment.
It did indeed. And it was that your description's right on target.
And how about some of the people who helped make that day? And there was Ruth Hirschberg. And I remember
Absolutely.
she was integral to inviting people.
No question about it. And Ruthie was such a complete, capable follow-up person. When she had an assignment, she got it done.
She was your director of special services
Yeah.
and handled all those things.
And handled them so well and effectively.
And then we had Grace George,
Yep.
who was as Jack had just mentioned, a retired English teacher who devoted her retirement to
Yep.
raising historical awareness again of the Great Falls and giving tours of the Great Falls.
You said it perfectly. That's exactly right. That's what she was. And they became contagious to other people. Doubting Thomases all of a sudden say, well, maybe they've got something here. Maybe I didn't look at it the way I should have. And it's very interesting. And I'm sorry if it sounds patronizing, but make not light of what you did, Ed, to help make all of that happen by playing the note that need to be played at different times. Very significant for Paterson's future, the recognition of her past and the merchandising thereof.
Yes.
Don't make light of it, Smyk's contribution. Seriously, it's very important.
After the administration changed, I was in a county car passing the back of City Hall on Ellison Street. And there was a ton of files out there on the sidewalk. And they had discarded, the incoming administration had discarded
Make
all
room.
of these files, right? So
Treasures,
I
treasures.
take and stop this car, and one of the janitors is alarmed because it had one of those searchlights on it. I guess he thought I was from the prosecutor's office.
Yes.
So I told him who I was, and I just opened the trunk and I started throwing these things in there. And one of them was a file of Norma Harrison, your
Right.
public information officer's media releases.
Right.
And I have before me now a selection that Norma did, and Norma was a very skilled writer.
Amen.
And just again, this is another person from behind the scenes in the Kramer
That
administration
made a difference.
that made a difference.
Absolutely.
And here's a release that was put out in October of 1979. Paterson History, an illustrated booklet that was put out on Paterson history that she helped edit. This is just one of the releases.
Yeah.
Here's about a marathon, an 8-mile mini marathon. This is in 1970s at the Great Falls Festival, which is something you could tell us about the Great Falls Festival in a minute. And some of the other things that she had done. Great Falls Festival talent search. Singers and musicians at the Great Falls Festival.
Right.
Paterson opens a photograph of industrial history in a restored mill here. Photographs of Charles A. Lindbergh and others, people who were notable in Paterson's history. Craft teachers volunteer for Paterson's first historic district. And this was a release put out on your engraved letterhead. Paterson, New Jersey, a city turning around. And this again discusses what you were trying to do in Paterson. And this went out back in 1979 too. So, you know, the historical record is there. One of the things that Norma wrote about, and as I said, we were talking previously about her exuberance. And I said, Mayor Lawrence F. Kramer Jr. and Ms. Harrison were enthusiastic and filled with boundless optimism on what the future would hold. And this is a letter that I sent as the county historian in February of 2000 to Bill Hughes, who was a staff writer for the North Jersey Herald and News. And she talked about, you know, grant monies. And she said, this was the vision. Historic mills once housed looms and dyeing vats. Historic mills, which once housed looms and dyeing vats, will now house craft studios, specialty shops, and art galleries. And shoppers will dine in restaurants overlooking cascading water, which once powered the textile machines, and afterwards walk along a tranquil, tree-shaded raceway park just 3 blocks from City Hall. Now, those things were what you wanted to happen and what you worked for. They were aspirational.
That's right.
And they didn't come to fruition, not all of them at that time, but now years later, through the efforts of Bill Pasquarello and others, Leonard Zaks and others, these things are now starting to happen. But again, it is building that firm foundation, and that starts at the grassroots with people who care and you want to do something about it.
And there were people there that cared.
They were.
Absolutely.
Let's go to the next picture of the saddle type locomotive, Glenn. And there is the locomotive manufactured in Paterson in 1910, and it was discovered in September of 1978 in Kempton, PA, rotting away.
Right.
And here's an interesting story about that. That was, of course, obtained, and it was part of the city of Paterson and the Great Falls developments. The Bring It Back campaign raised about $15,000 to do it. Now, what a lot of people don't know is you only learn this when you study things for many, many years and understand all of the connections. I don't know if you remember the executive secretary. You may, you'd been quite young at the time, John J. Fitzgerald of the Paterson Chamber of Commerce.
Sure.
Yeah.
Before Ed McEwen.
Before Ed McEwen. he succeeded
Yeah.
Fitzgerald. And Fitzgerald's daughter, Alice Fitzgerald, went to the University of Syracuse and was like the highest in her class. And she was my history teacher at Paterson Central
Oh, how
High.
interesting. Okay.
And Miss Fitzgerald was a thin, very slight lady, very scholarly lady. And we would talk about this, and she kind of lit up when I said to her in her class afterwards, your father was John J. Fitzgerald. And he was another man of boundless optimism who played a very commanding role in the development and the construction of the Alexander Hamilton Hotel, which was a Chamber of Commerce
Activity.
But in 1928, 1929, he initiated, John J. Fitzgerald, correspondence with various locomotive manufacturers. And the plan was for the chamber to get a locomotive to come to be on exhibit.
Right.
And he was also a proponent. Well, we have the first submarine. We could use a locomotive. And he wanted to take and develop this
Concept.
exactly, this concept
Effectively. Yeah.
through the Chamber of Commerce.
Sure.
And not expecting the taxpayers to fund it, but trying to draw people into
Chamber
it.
money could be raised.
Maybe a seed money.
Yeah.
So this was years later, we're talking about, that was in 1928,
Right.
29. So in 1978, we get this locomotive. Let's go to number 7, photo 7, Glenn. And there's an aerial photo of the locomotive advancing past Paterson City Hall on Tuesday, November 22nd, 1978, taken by Don Smith.
I remember Don well.
And Don kept copies of a lot of the photos, and from
Right.
whom I received them, and I, of course, indexed them
Yep.
for an occasion like this. And now we're going to go to the next photo, which you played a commanding role in obtaining locomotive 299 found in Panama. And you negotiated with the Panama Canal Zone Company. You visited Panama
I did indeed.
with Sid Willis, Community
Yeah.
Development Director.
Yeah.
And this produced a real little bit of a diplomatic brouhaha, which we can go into. Gabriel Luis Galindo, the director of the Panama Canal Authority, lodged a protest.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a privately owned locomotive, but you know, you're stealing Panama's
Of
heritage,
course, of course.
which was bunk. And the National Legislative Council condemned the transfer as a flagrant violation of the Panama Canal Treaty. And a Panamanian newspaper called it the Great Train Robbery
Right.
Locomotive. So tell us a little bit about this locomotive.
Well, there was a way to try to track the history of locomotives. And when we landed, we wanted one of the older ones, one of the original ones that came out of this building. And we came up with the information, I think it was Norma, that 299 existed and was in a semi-museum setting in Panama. And we began the fight to see if there wasn't some way to bring it home. And it was, in the beginning, not difficult to get people excited about it, to raise any money that we were going to need to bring it home, that kind of thing. But when it became a focal point issue with folks in Panama raising hell that we were stealing this locomotive,
Abducting it.
that's a much better word, then the war broke out. And I have to say that Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States at the time. And he, of course, was getting tremendous pressure from the quote unquote folks in Panama that this should not happen. It should stay here in Panama. And to make a long story short, we were able to get information that the vote would take place on a Sunday afternoon in Panama of the committee to say it stays or it goes. But we were also tipped to the fact that on a given Sunday, there would be a dramatically less attendees
Yes,
at their meeting. That triggered the date for us to be in Panama and make the pitch. And we made the pitch, which I don't think was all that effective. We either had the votes or we didn't, to be honest with you. And then we moved as quickly as possible before anything could change the vote that had said it could go home. And so I was been teased constantly as the only guy that ever rode a locomotive through the Panama Canal. But the canal people were of great help to us as well. Not the power structure, some individuals that thought, well, okay, I guess it did its job here, and I guess it's yours, and you really want very much to have it back for the reasons that you've indicated. And we moved quickly. The big break we got was that there is in the canal a huge floating crane, because if a ship happens to go down,
they would extract it.
they would have the capability
Have
to
extract it,
extract it.
yeah.
So we were able to get that locomotive put on her bow of the ship that would go to New Orleans every other day, every other week. And it went to New Orleans with the president, Jimmy Carter, insisting that the ship be turned around. Well, they weren't about to turn the ship around. And Jimmy, in fairness, was getting tremendous pressure from a congressman in Staten Island who just got excited about it. I think his name was Murphy. But anyway, the locomotive, we stayed with it. We got through the canal and she went into the ocean and off to New Orleans. When it landed in New Orleans, then the real problems began, because first of all, their railroad gauge is different than ours, so you couldn't put it on a track and drive it home. It had to come home on a flatbed. And when that happened, it now was too tall to go through the Baltimore Tunnel. So it had to go out west, and I'm suffering you through that only because what
No,
would
I
happen,
think this is not many people know about it. I didn't know about it.
well, what would happen is as Locomotive had gotten so much publicity across the country about this one that's going to go home. And I think that was part of the reason people started to back off. It had had abnormal amount of publicity of this locomotive that was going back to its birthplace. And as a result, when it would get spotted, I would get letters or telegrams from people who were at a crossing and 299 went by in Indiana or California, because it had to go west up to the top of the country, across the bottom of Canada, and then back down to here. And that was wrought with a million chances for it to get in trouble. But somehow it became the stepson of railroaders.
I see. Yeah.
And railroaders thought, damn it, this is right, and it's exciting, and it's fun, and I'm going to do what I can to help it get home. And home it came. And I think I've suffered through the story of.
That's called a circuitous route.
That's exactly what it was, and with a lot of help. And then
Yeah.
it went into the Continental Can Company in Paterson because the track could take it there, where we hid it out and for 3 or 4 days before the actual homecoming event. And we were able to clean it up and paint it up and have it look like it should look. And 299 came down Market Street from the track at the Erie track. And that was important to me because what happened was, if you go back to where the locomotives that came out of this building, they were taken by 20 teams of horses up Market Street.
That's correct.
To be put on the track to go out to the owner.
To the owner who purchased them. Yeah.
And here it was coming back the way it had left.
The way it had left.
It came down with the great Carmen Otilio was chief engineer on guiding the horses, which he was surprisingly very good at. And down came our engine important to note that they all said that knew that as it passed City Hall, that was the toughest spot when it was leaving, because it had come up the hill from Market Street to level off on Market Street in front of City Hall. And when they got there, the 20 teams of horses were exhausted because they had just pulled it, quote, uphill.
Uphill, yeah.
And the rule was that's where you rested the teams until they had a decent rest. And this guy who was always the chief cook and bottle washer on how to move it out to the track, he would then say they've rested long enough, we go to the track. And they'd start up with their 20 teams and take it up. Well, we brought it back. I don't think, in fairness, there were 20. There were more like 6 or 8 teams because it was sitting on a track. It was sitting on wheels at that point. It wasn't too tough to pull downhill. Anyway, I've suffered you long enough. That's the story of 299 making it home.
That is a fantastic tale. And now let's go to the next photo, which is the welcome home ceremony on June 8th, 1979. And there you are making an address, and right below you, wearing a 299 cap is Dr. D. Stanton Hammond of the Historical Society.
He was an amazing man and cared about history of Paterson.
He really did.
Like a guy I'm talking to.
Well, thank you. Dr. Hammond's a very interesting man. He had received his undergraduate degree at New York University in 1912 in pedagogy.
Wow.
And then at night, he went to, the reason I said, what kind of a doctor was he? Well, he went to NYU and he earned a doctor of jurisprudence degree where he had to write a thesis for it because he was very interested in map making and deed research. And he thought he could make a career out of that, but he just stayed as the principal of School 20 for many years. And he made a great contribution of knowledge in his maps and other things. And he was like, again, he was a fixture on the scene.
Amen.
In your administration.
Amen.
And I was
Always
just starting
there.
out.
Yep, very effective.
1912, and then that other degree in 1923.
Can you
So
imagine?
quite an
Principal of
interesting
school
guy.
number 20 for many years.
That's correct. So that's a really kind of classic photo, and that was taken by Mike Ritchie
All right.
of the news.
Yeah.
And let's go to the next one, Glenn. Hooray for the great train robber, Mayor Kramer.
Yep.
And I have tried to find out who that little gal is, and I hope that someone will come forward. Maybe she will come
I
forward.
can make a little contribution. I don't know who she is, but
It's a beautiful photograph.
the school that she was at was St. Mary's Grammar School. If that helps in any way.
I'll make a note of that. Yeah, St. Mary's Grammar School. That
Yes,
is a good class.
that's what, and I don't know what that was, where we were or what was happening, but.
Well, this is part of the ceremony. That when it was taken on that day, it was taken crowd scene photo on June 6, 1979.
Yeah, I think it was St. Mary's Grammar School.
St. Mary's School. It doesn't look like a school uniform. So that little
that's
girl
true.
shines out from the pages
Yeah.
of history, from the photos of history from 1979. Hooray for Mayor Kramer, recycling the great train robber.
Okay. Yep.
All right, I'd like to go for a little bit, another memory lane. There is you with Rediscover Paterson Tours, and that was Vince Cortez.
Oh, of course, Chamber.
He was the Chamber of Commerce.
Yep, okay.
And he worked on a lot of things. And
Absolutely.
I knew him. He was the classic civic booster.
Yep.
And I knew him from the Hamilton Club
Yeah,
when I served on the Board of Governors. And he was quite a guy.
he cared.
Yeah, I think he
wanted,
did.
he wanted to make a positive difference anywhere he could.
And let us go to the next one. And there you are on the cover of New Jersey Business Magazine.
And bring your business to Paterson.
Yes. That's August 1979. And it was written by a fellow that I knew, and I'm sure you remember him too. It was Tom Vaughan,
Oh,
who was a
sure.
writer for the,
Yeah,
and you made certain predictions about the town, and you talked about how you were hiring qualified administrators, Larry D. Worth, George Tuttle, he became the finance chief,
absolutely.
and Sidney Willis. And I thought I would just throw, this is the actual magazine.
That was some team though, that you just named. Those guys were all so good and cared.
And they called you a GOP Kennedy. A GOP Kennedy. And it's all about the city and things were done in neighborhood preservation and things like that. This was a reprint of the magazine.
Okay.
But I thought that was a really great photo of you, which kind of symbolized, with Paterson as the backdrop, what you were accomplishing. Let's go to number 13, photo 13. Now, this man
Oh, my goodness.
was somebody you know very well.
Yeah.
And you used to go to his St. Patrick's Day parties at the Alexander Hamilton Hotel.
Absolutely.
Harry B. Haynes.
The Harry B. Haynes, we say.
Who was the guy who knew everything and anything that was happening in the city.
He
The
could
publisher.
he could rival you, I think, if he were here today in
I'm
terms
sure
of
he could.
history.
I only met the man once. And
Okay,
I
well-
later was instrumental with his grandson in
Right.
transferring his papers and
Yeah.
material to the Historical Society.
Right.
And that was something that
Where
I
they should have
did.
gone, because that was, he was the history of Paterson in many ways.
And, but Harry Haynes this photo was taken, his dates are 1882, 1972, editor and publisher of the Paterson News
Yeah.
in the 1940s. And this was his rather cluttered little office in the news building. And
The news building was right behind City Hall.
when you were inaugurated, Haynes wrote it in a statement, "Do not hesitate to call upon us at any time that you feel we can be of assistance in the forward-looking programs you must need inaugurate." And he wrote that. And he was, I think, a staunch supporter of what you were trying to do.
Well, I could.
Tell us some stories about
I could
Harry.
tell a little one out of, he and my dad were pals, and I think that helped me a great deal at the time. He and my father had a good friendship, and I think that when I'm all of a sudden in the mayor's office, I think he was looking to be a little help if he could. And let me tell you, he was no little help. He was a great deal.
Harry Haynes was the kind of a guy that was totally dedicated to
To a
Paterson.
friend, yeah.
Yeah, and quite loyal. But let me tell you, if Harry Haynes didn't like you, you might as well leave Paterson.
You got that right.
And there was that murderous battle that he had with Mike DeVita.
Yeah.
Mike in his own way was a very decent and a kind of a brash guy, but a decent guy.
I'm first one to tell you that he went out of his
He was
way.
mayor, one of your predecessors.
To be helpful to me, to say, Pat, if there's anything I can do, never hesitate to call me. Both that man, Harry B. Haynes, and Michael U. DeVita.
And they got into this terrible fight war over the Plaza of Memories
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
curule.
Oh, yeah.
Did you remember the curule chair? The
Sure.
stone chair.
Sure, for mothers.
And they,
How could he do that to poor mothers, you know?
yeah, Haynes said, you're against motherhood.
Yeah.
And and Mike DeVita called it the emperor's chair, and the emperor was Haynes.
Yeah, of course.
So, but Haynes took in that Plaza of Memory, it still exists, not in the way he thought it would be as a hall of fame, but he was one of the great figures on the Paterson scene
No question.
from the time he acceded when his father died and became the editor and publisher until he died in 1972. I only met him once as a very elderly man. He lived in New York.
Yes.
He once lived in Paterson. He lived in New York.
And Mrs. Haynes was very active.
That's right.
Because I remember her
Helene.
kind of
Helene.
whispering to me one time that you're doing a good job, and we're gonna help you.
Helene. So he used to have that St. Patrick's Day gathering.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There's a photo which I that I'm gonna have to try and find a view with a St. Patrick's Day hat on.
Well, you also find my father was active with that group.
With active in that group.
Yeah, it was a kind of a command performance, I think, when Harry invited you to the Alexander.
You had to go, yeah.
You better go.
Because in those days, the newspapers had tremendous influence.
Absolutely.
You know, the Williams family, remember, we could probably talk for hours
The
about
morning
these.
call.
The morning call
Yep.
and the people that you knew when we had, and even back to the days when we had the Paterson Press Guardian, which went out of business in 1930.
I can't quite go back to that one, but I certainly, the other two papers, knew, Sandy and I are really the same age, kind of, Sandy Williams growing up.
Yes,
And not,
Yeah.
In the kind of the same neighborhood, we knew each other. But he was a very strange guy in many ways. I mean, what was important to Sandy was important to Sandy. But he was obsessed with the idea, I think, that, I should be the newspaper that counts, not the Paterson News. And that war was going on all the time.
well, they always took, pretty much opposite opinions.
Yeah,
Although his uncle, his father,
this is Sandy's uncle?
Sandy's uncle was Robert Williams.
I didn't know.
And he was a Princeton graduate
Uh-huh.
who was a noted book collector
Ah,
and on the library board for many, many years. And he gave some rare books to the library.
right.
But he'd written some books. One of them was called The Pageant of
Oh,
Printing.
wow, very talented guy.
So, yeah, in fact, when Woodrow Wilson came here, he stayed at, they
how
put him up at
interesting.
the Williams house.
All right.
But that family was extremely very active and had done also a lot for the city.
Yeah. Sandy's mother was an artist, a painter.
Yeah, I think her name was Peggy.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
I couldn't have
Peggy,
done that, but you're right.
Yeah, Peggy, she was an artist and very interested in, I had some interesting talks with Sandy,
Yeah.
years later after he was out of the business.
Yeah.
He was still living on, and they asked him once, as an elderly man, he said, well, what would you be doing today if you were still, he said, I would be trying to make Paterson make it a better city. And that's what he said as an elderly guy. He got himself in a little trouble along the way, but
Yeah.
but an interesting man. And let's go to our other photo that'll bring back some memories. And here you are with Paterson's grand old man, Mayor John V. Hinchcliffe.
Yeah. Who gave me some very sound advice.
This is at Paterson's 175th anniversary celebration at Overlook Park on July 4th, 1967.
Wow.
So what do you remember of John V? I mean,
I am mayor-elect. I have not taken office. And I'm walking into 175 Market Street. We had a headquarters there. And I step in the elevator and he's there. And he said, I said, oh, hi, Mayor, how are you? And he said, well, congratulations, young man, congratulations. I said, have you got any advice for the new mayor? Yes, he said, never go to a meeting of the Board of Public Works, the Police and Fire, or the Board of Finance. And I thought I should be at all three of those meetings. I said, why is that, Mr. Mayor? He said, because you'll be subject to instant decision.
a wise man.
Let the meeting take place. You'll hear what happened, and you'll have time to think about what's the right thing to do.
In other words, don't be buffaloed into making a hasty decision.
Yeah. They were stepping in the elevator and congratulations, young man. And I said, well, thank you, Mayor. Got any advice? And that was the advice he gave me. Never go to a meeting in the Board of Public Works, the Police and Fire, or the Board of Finance. Remember, the Board of Finance was the power and glory in those days. But everybody wanted to be on the Board of Police and Fire. That was because then you got a badge on your car or something. And somehow that was important.
Do you remember one of the early movers and shakers? You would remember him from the 60s, George F. Mitchell.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah.
Now, George F. Mitchell was a very conservative guy.
Right.
He ran for mayor of Paterson against Ray Newman.
Okay.
was an
Way
accountant,
back,
way
right.
back in the
Yeah.
1920s, wasn't
But the
elected.
Mitchell Building, he built.
He built
Across
that.
from the Alexander Hamilton Hotel.
And George Mitchell, again, he was a conservative guy, but he also had Paterson at heart.
Uh-huh.
And in later years, he buys this property, the Van Saun House in Wayne,
Uh-huh.
and he restored that building. He saved that building. It's still in existence as a
Wow.
private house. He used it
Yeah.
as his residence because he started out as a plumbing contractor.
Right.
And he did the plumbing for the Alexander Hamilton Hotel.
Oh my God, the McBrides let one get away.
Yeah, and apparently. And he was on the platform when Herbert Hoover came to Paterson in
Uh-huh.
September of 1928, of which I've written about.
Right.
And then, of course, the Republican leader at that time was John McCutcheon,
Oh,
And you had Jimmy
Marion
Miller.
Rauschenbach's.
Marion
Father.
Rauschenbach's father,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
And Marion Rauschenbach, she was there's
What a
another
classy-
lady.
A lovely, classy lady who cared about Patterson and worked very hard for
I
it.
think she went to Skidmore. She was a very bright lady, very much involved in social service activities too.
She's just a fine, fine person in every way.
So these are some of the people that come to mind. And when we're talking about John V. Hinchcliffe, there was another man, and we've spoken about him. And I'd like to do a program on him because he's now pretty much forgotten, except for Dill Plaza by the post office, named
Right.
after him. And that was
Sure.
Billy Dill, William L. Dill. And you got a great story about Billy Dill, about who's going to come. Tell us the story about him. He became the regional federal Social Security
You
administrator.
gotta help me here in the springtime on my senility. I don't remember.
He said,
the story.
who's going to come to my funeral?
Oh, yeah,
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 exactly
yeah,
right.
yeah.
And made it called my father
He called you, yeah.
and said, "Hey, Larry,
Who's going to come to my
Larry,
funeral?
there's nobody left." And my father got out of a sick bed to go to the funeral because that's the way those guys were. That mattered to them. I promised this guy I'm going. Like, he's never gonna know whether you went or you didn't go, But that I made a promise. You got to keep a promise. That's the way those guys all operated. What was right was right.
And he was kind of the finance guy for, as a Democrat
Didn't
for
become Judge Dill. Didn't become a
Judge Dill. He was on the Court of Errors and Appeals. He was the only guy. He went to Mercerburg Academy
Right.
in Pennsylvania.
You're amazing. How the hell?
I don't know how I remember all
Right,
this stuff
right.
too. But he went to Mercerburg Academy. He ran for governor too. And
Sorry.
so he became he was a member of the Board of Finance, which was a very powerful board.
Yeah, sure.
And
They had the purse strings.
They had the purse strings because Paterson, there was then operated by these a strong mayor kind of
Sure.
the governor who appointed all of the commissioners,
Yeah.
and they were independent commissions. The park commission was independent, the finance board,
Yeah,
Public
how
Works,
the hell
yeah,
do you
yeah.
know that? My
So,
God.
but
Now,
anyway,
He.
go ahead. with-
No, one item I wanted to mention that the only city hall in the world where the three major faiths of that city are represented by three statues in front of
That's
the
correct.
city
That is
hall.
correct.
A Protestant, a Catholic, and a
And
Jew
it's you.
are all accomplished sons in the city of Paterson. The city cared enough to put their statue. And ironically, the three major faiths of the city and the three major faiths of the nation, hopefully by accident,
Yeah.
by
yeah,
three accomplished sons.
Garrett A. Hobart, who was born in Long Branch, but he was vice president under McKinley.
Right?
Dr. McBride,
Oh,
Francis
yeah, yeah,
McBride,
sure.
and Nathan Barnett, who lived to be at the dedication of his own statue. And that they,
How many guys get that?
and
Yeah,
two of them, the McBride and the one of Barnett, were done by Gaetano Federici.
of course. Oh, who else? He did it all
And
around.
you
here.
remember Federici
Yeah,
very
sure,
well. He
sure.
was
Special guy.
He was pretty good.
Yeah.
A great, in his own way, a great man. Let's go to our last photo. And there you are with
Clifford
Senator
Case?
Case.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't know where that was taken, but I
Very
thought it
good
was
to me.
just,
Very good to me.
what,
Went out of his way. He was the United States Senator, but you could call him. And the gal who ran his office was named Frances, and I can't think of her last name. And I would call Frances and say, "Frances, I need a little help with And Frances would make it all happen.
She was the major domo, so to
Yeah,
speak,
she
right?
could, yeah, she wouldn't even tell him half of the stuff. She'd just send me the letter I needed, you know?
So this was at some point early on in your administration,
Yeah.
and I thought it was such an excellent photograph.
He came to Paterson and campaigned for me at the Alexander Hamilton Hotel. And everybody said, you'll never get him, you'll never get him. He was very active with the Jewish community.
Yes.
And the Charlie Jacobses of this world and the Jewish community, they could put in pressure on him to come to Paterson and speak at a Kramer rally down near the end of it all. And it was great publicity at the time. We needed it, that kind of thing. And then I'm at the Republican convention in Miami, and he wants the New Jersey delegation to vote himself as a favorite son, not outright Nixon. Nixon's got the thing locked up. But I sat to 2:00 in the morning with a handful of other idiots from around Jersey to vote for Clifford. And I thought, Pat, I could never leave that. What that guy did for me, you know, he came when we needed him desperately. How the hell can I go anywhere? And he got slaughtered. You know, we got nowhere with it. That wasn't the point. The point was he had turned to some of us and said, hey, I'd appreciate it if you would vote for a favorite son. He was trying to make a deal somewhere, I guess with Nixon, who the hell knows what the deal was.
Yeah.
I wasn't privy to any of that. But all I really thought was, hey, Pat, when you needed him, he was there.
He was there for you.
He came to the Alexander Hamilton Hotel.
Well, as you were saying, a lot of things were decided on handshakes in those days.
And they kept them.
And we were talking about even the Democratic leader and the
And they
Republican
kept
leader.
them.
Right.
Absolutely. A deal was a deal. Tony Grossi. was
Tony
a straight
Grossi,
shooter.
yeah.
I found him to be a hell of a straight shooter in terms of, you know, listen, I'm gonna knock your brains out if I can. You know, that was tough.
Yeah.
You know, but when he said, hey, this is what I need, you know, any chance you can, we'll find a way. Then a cute story of Tony you can't repeat. Tony is, I'm running against Frank Graves, and there's no love. Tony knows he can't.
Right.
He knows he can't trust him. But he can't, he's the Democratic leader. So he's got to be very careful. So he controls the fourth ward. The black ward was Tony's. He spread the money around. He had to spend around to the right guys, you know, Ed's in charge, or Pat's in charge, whoever. He did what he had to do. So now I'm running against Graves. And we landslide Frank. They don't vote for me, they vote against him. But anyway, 3 or 4 weeks later, I'm at one of the dinners, shaking hands, and I get to the table that Tony's at. We ran like crazy in the black ward. No Republican could run that good in a black ward. So Tony had obviously done his thing. So Tony says, congratulations, man. I said, well, thank you. He said, let me ask you a question. Who didn't trust me in the fourth ward? You or Charlie Jacobs? Is that perfect?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Who didn't trust me?
You know, Frank Graves was, of course, a very, very powerful guy. But, you know, I think he really loved Paterson.
Absolutely, in his own way.
In his own way.
Yeah.
He loved Pat. He was a very kind of, you know, you do it or else kind of a guy.
Oh, yeah, but he was, you know, he cared.
And he was a guy. My phone would ring and he never would announce himself. You know who it was. And he'd say, I need a text for a plaque. And he'd say,
Yeah.
When do you need, and I'd say, well, and I reckon it was the mayor, right? Well, when do you need it? I need it Thursday.
Right.
And then I would say, all right, and tell me what it was about.
Yeah.
And he'd always sign off by saying, bye. That was
Kind of
Frank
a
Graves.
long.
Yeah, that was Frank
Yeah.
Graves for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it.
And you ran against him and you had your battles.
But ironically, the Graves campaign, firemen and policemen, this is us. Firemen and policemen still live in Paterson. There isn't a fireman or a policeman doesn't have a grave sign on the lawn. all through Hillcrest.
Well, he was a big proponent for
Yeah.
fire and police, yeah. That's
They've all
what
got it, but not a one of them is voting for him. Because they were not pro-Pat, they were anti-Frank at the time. So when the numbers come in and they were crazy, I mean, you can't. Well, that's when he really got angry. That's when he really got mad, because I had done you a favor and obviously you didn't vote for me. That was Frank. He would get very uptight over what he thought he was entitled to.
You know,
Say what you will about the devil, he's a hard worker.
he was a hard worker, and I said in his own way.
He wanted to do the right thing.
He tried to do the right thing.
I quite agree
He
with you.
really did.
I-
But I mean, he just had at Paterson his heart, County Commissioner Terry Duffy would say to me about knowing about this stuff that I've studied. He'd say, well, the reason Ed knows about it because he was there in 1850, and
Of course, of course.
and I kind of laugh.
Yes, no, those going to do.
Terry's an authentic guy. He really is.
Yeah.
Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen, for
Did we
this.
get what we were after?
Yeah,
I
I
hope so.
hope, I hope all of you
I
enjoyed
enjoyed it, that's for
as,
sure.
as much as I've enjoyed
And a
this.
very special thank you to the troops that made it all happen. Thank you for inviting me, and thank Ed for his wisdom and history and knowledge of it all. Thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me,
You behaving over there?
And on behalf of everyone who's part of this program, this was incredible. This was just a really, really interesting and in a lot of cases humorous look back at Paterson's history seen through the lens of Mayor Kramer.
Did you get what you wanted? That's all we really care about.
We did. We got one question for you. Sharon Briggs asked the question, how many days did it actually take once the 299 locomotive left Panama? How many days did it take to actually get here? Do we
I
remember?
would think my guess would be 5 or 6 weeks. But I'm guessing.
5 or 6 weeks, for it
Yeah.
to arrive.
Okay.
To get to Paterson, it was 5, because it went out to California, across the top of the country and down. And I was terrified that we're gonna start getting bills from different railroad, but they somehow were all in on the game, and there was no bills. We paid nothing, either on the ship to bring it over or on the trip around the country to come to Paterson.
Excellent. And just to point out to the folks watching this program, remind everyone from the beginning of the program, we mentioned that Mayor Kramer is actually one of our Paterson Museum Foundation trustees. And we're all excited that we're actually in the process. It'll be a few years, but we're going to be actually constructing a shed over both locomotives here at the museum. So that's one of the projects we've taken on. So everything takes time today. So we know that, but it will happen. And we want to thank you.
I have a birthday coming in February, and I think you better hurry if we're gonna get it up.
Well, I think we're going to find a special celebration for your birthday in February. There's some plans in the works right now.
Fair enough. To put all the money over in the cover for 299.
We'll do it. And so to the both of you, Ed, thank you for conducting
Thank you,
today's
guys.
session. And Mayor, again, thank you for.
Hope it helps, pal. We
Again.
enjoyed it.
Pat was the man who laid the foundation for what we have today.
Yes, and the fact that Route
Testimony, but I love it.
and the
Thank
fact
you,
that Route
guys.
19 and the fact that Route 19 doesn't go right through the middle of all that is a
Well, that
testament
was
to.
the
Yep.
Mary Ellen.
Oh,
Kramer.
absolutely.
Mary Ellen and the
Mary
mayor.
Ellen, absolutely.
That's another whole program.
Yeah,
Pat.
sure is. No,
With our
no,
friends in
that's
Trenton.
also absolutely true. She was the one that got that highway out of there. Palmer.
J. Palmer Murphy?
J. Palmer Murphy.
Yes.
She got to him and ended that rush of putting the highway right
Was
to
that
the
J.
floor.
Palmer Murphy, or was that Palmer maybe was his last name? He
Yeah, I
was,
think
he
it was
was-
last name.
He was the
Commissioner of Transportation.
transportation, yeah, that was, J. Palmer Murphy was with the bank,
Oh, you're right.
yeah.
You're right. Anyway, God bless, guys.
Thank
Enjoyed
you.
it very much.
Thank
Hope it
you.
helps.
Thanks for
Anytime,
this.
anywhere.
Thanks, Pat,
Yep.
thanks for this pageant of Paterson history.
Yeah. You better hurry while he's still alive. Goodbye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who's on today. And look for future sessions with conversations with Ed on our Facebook page, and as well as the museum's Facebook page, which we've got. The next event will be coming up very soon. It'll be our own curator, Heather. Our side will be talking about negatives.
One thing, our next
Yes.
program, next webinar is going to be on the Meadowbrook in Cedar Grove, which again, I believe that we are not confined by county boundaries, even though it's in Essex County. We have a lot of Essex County friends and a lot of people from this area who danced at the Meadowbrook. So that's going to be our next program.
I have a fabulous Meadowbrook story for you.
Do y'all have to be on the program, Pat?
No, I got to you right now.
He wants to give us your.
Oh, he's going to come back to his chair?
No, this is supposedly,
Oh,
I
a
can't
private one?
confirm any of it, right. I'm talking to a guy who tells me, I can't remember his name, he said he worked for the Glenn Miller Band. I said, you did? What did you do? He said, I was the listener. So what are you talking about? Now, the Miller Band played at
At the Meadowbrook.
the
yeah.
Meadowbrook
Oh,
on
sure.
many occasions.
Tommy Dorsey, Glenn Miller,
He
yeah.
said Glenn was a fanatic for everything being exactly right. And he said, my job was to sit in the car in the parking lot and listen to the band on the radio when it was doing its broadcast.
Yes. Which
And
are
then my
broadcast
job
live.
was to run in and say to Glenn that Sam is playing too loud. Pat is not with you. He could supposedly.
That's a great story.
Yeah, and then run in and tell Glenn, and Glenn would say, hey, you hear what he said? Now, is any part of it true? I have no idea, but it's a good story.
It has some ring of authenticity to
Jay,
it.
doesn't it? God bless, guys. Be well.
Take care.
Thanks,
Take care, Mayor.
everybody.
And again, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Like I said, keep an eye out on Facebook for our next installments, as Ed mentioned, with the Meadowbrook. We'll be talking about that. Ed, we got to remember that Paterson was part of Essex County at one time, so that puts us in our range here. So
That's correct.
and the other will be on November 22nd. And again, Heather will be talking about the negative digitization program that we're doing right now. So again, thank you all for coming today, and we will see you soon. So take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.